Vegas Strip, 34-24. Should send a couple shivers up Broncos fans' spines, but there's plenty of those to go around. When you look at the standings in the AFC West as it is right now, the Broncos are the only team without a win. Chiefs and Raiders 2-0. And it may be that way for a while. It is a little tough to look at the Broncos now and look at the upcoming game against Tampa and think, yeah, they've got this one, right? I mean, that doesn't seem like that's likely to go. So I'm not really sure if you're the Denver Broncos where you move forward with this. Today, a absolutely disastrous day with the injuries. Courtland Sutton is done for the season. He had that sprained AC joint in the shoulder, and then he ends up tearing the ACL in his knee. He is done. Now you're talking about Drew Lock missing 2 to 6 weeks, according to our Broncos insider Mike Kliss, with a issue with the labrum and rotator cuff in the back of his shoulder. Fangio basically said 3 to 5, so probably safe bet is 3 to 6. Truthfully, it's not going to be something that's going to be rushed. So this is a bad situation for the Denver Broncos. There are immense number of injuries this year already. Von Miller, Drew Lock, A.J. Boye, Phillip Lindsay, Draymond Jones, now Courtland Sutton, Mark Barron, who they signed to try to help. They've all been hurt. So this is a shocking sort of start for the Broncos, and you really don't want to put too much emphasis on the rest of the season, but I don't know where they're going to go. I mean, I have no idea where they're going to be able to go here at all. And for this team in an interesting year, they're in trouble. I had them winning 6 games prior to the season. I don't know how they're going to win 6 games now. If you look at the rest of this schedule for the Broncos as they continue to work their way through a problematic at best season. I mean, you think about this. Okay, you have Jeff Driscoll's going to be in for the next 3 at minimum, right? So realistically, that's what you're looking at, the next 3 games at minimum for Jeff Driscoll. Well, the next 3 for the Broncos are, of course, against Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers next week, then the New York Jets. Now, maybe the New York Jets also 0-2. They're pretty bad. Maybe you've got a shot there. New England looks pretty good. Should be 2-0 with Cam Newton resurrecting his career up in Foxborough. And then maybe Miami. Okay. So if you have that window before the bye week, and let's face it, if Vic Fangio said it's 3 to 5 weeks for Drew Lock. Let's put it all together. You have 5 games prior to the bye. Drew Lock is an immense part of the future of this team. You're not going to see Drew Lock till after the bye in Atlanta. It just doesn't make any sense to do so. If the Broncos were so careful with him last year like they were, why wouldn't they be careful with him this time around? He might not even be ready anyway. So the most sensible time to see him is against the Falcons in November. During that span of time, you have maybe 2 winnable games against a bad Jets team and a Miami team that's finding itself. But this assumes that somebody comes back, that Phillip Lindsay comes back, that maybe Mark Barron comes back, that somebody comes back, because they have so many injuries. You're looking at a start of 2-5 at best. I mean, that's at best 2-5. Now you want to look glass half full. The Broncos have lost 2 games by a combined 7 points. And it's fair to look at it that way. I actually look at that Pittsburgh final, that 26-21 final, and look at the situation the Broncos found themselves in all game long and think, boy, 5 isn't all that bad. That seems like they did pretty well, only losing by 5 in that game. But they did lose. And for the Broncos, it's very difficult to think of any scenario in which they come out better than 2-5. 2-5 means they're not going to the playoffs. We know that. So the question for you, and I'd like to ask this to you, the RamosLaw.com text line is 303-713-1043, is how do you feel about this season now? If Drew Lock's going to be out to the bye week, and this team at best can be 2-5, maybe 1-6, maybe 0-7, are you in tank mode? At what point do you even think about it and say, okay, forget it? I don't know about this season. Let's get back to it at 2021. Where do you come down on that? I'm curious. I think a lot of the fans really start to feel that way based on the ones that are talking to me. You're listening to KKFN HD1, Longmont, Denver. This is the Fan Late Night. I am Sean Drotar. Thanks for tuning in. Getting a little early there with the Monday Night Football game wrapping up. But for Broncos fans, all over my social media timeline, texts I got today are people basically asking is, when do the Broncos pack it in? Should they consider tanking for Trevor? I mean, this is the things that we've been talking about. Now, I warned as many people as possible. This team wasn't going to go to the playoffs. But this is bad. And the way they lost the first game with bad coaching, some bad play calling, that's a concern. And now the injuries are a concern. Do you look at the Broncos and say this is just bad luck? That they haven't had the health that they need? Or is it something more? Yep. Yeah. And now it's really hard to come back from it. So you're looking at a 2-5 start without Drew Lock. And let's say you get Drew Lock back then. Well, you're not getting Courtland Sutton back. You're not getting Von Miller back. Who knows if you're getting A.J. Boye back? I mean, if you were to go down the list of players that were the most important on this team, who would you come up with? Drew Lock, Courtland Sutton, Phillip Lindsay, Von Miller, A.J. Boye? I mean, who else would you pick? Jarrell Casey? Justin Simmons? At least they're out there. But it's remarkable how badly beat up this team is. And one of the challenges for the Broncos is the fact that they simply are not deep yet. They've had a series of bad drafts over the last, I think the last 2-3 years has been okay. Prior to that, it's been just a disaster. And so they still don't have a lot of depth at multiple positions. That's a major concern for this team because now you're stuck. Draymond Jones is also out for a month. DeMarcus Walker's going to be out for multiple weeks. I mean, think about this. Who's left? And at this point, this is why I asked the question. Does it matter now? Because for the Broncos, you look at it, and it's very tough to see how many games are winnable where they're this beat up. And there's no reason to rush anybody back. But if you're going into the bye, let's say it's 1-6, which is very realistic that they could drop one of the games to the Jets or the Dolphins. 1-6. What do you want to do? Do you just shut it down? Do you basically, as a fan, just say, all right, forget it, get back to it next year? How frustrating is this? Were you one of the fans who thought that this is a team that had a playoff shot? It probably hurts a little bit more to see it. The injuries are a problem. And they're not the only problem. The game they lost last week had more to do with coaching than playing. There are bright sides. I thought, given the circumstances, Jeff Driscoll played really well. Far better than I expected. I thought he did great. And the idea of going ahead and signing another quarterback. Look, you liked Brett Rippon enough to keep him on the practice squad. So Driscoll's number 1, Rippon's number 2. It's as good as you're going to get. I mean, who are you realistically going to go sign now? You're going to go trade for someone if Drew Lock is still your starter? Don't worry about it. Driscoll, what you got? And he'll be fine. As far as a backup quarterback, he's fine. He's in the upper half of backup quarterbacks. But he's a backup quarterback, and he's a backup quarterback for a reason. But this Broncos team was almost doomed because they did not, and I hate to harp on it, but it's simply the truth, they did not address the tackle position. They didn't do anything. They went out and got DeMar Dotson after Juwan James opted out for the season. Until then, they basically just went with what they had and figured it would get better. They didn't pick up Garrett Bowles' option. They didn't draft anybody. and off you go. The play in which Drew Lock was hurt, I want to take a look at how that breaks down for you, because I went and watched that about 75 times today, because it's illustrative of the Broncos' problems on the offensive line. So, on that play, the Steelers were rushing 4. No blitzer. Straight up, 4-man rush. 2 guys in the middle. You had Tuitt in the middle, along with Hayward. And then on the outside, you had T.J. Watt and you had Bud Dupree. Now, up the middle, Dalton Reisner looked phenomenal. Dalton Reisner had Cam Hayward, and he took him clean out of the play, just by himself. Took him off to the left, one-on-one, eliminated Hayward. Did a terrific job with that. The other guys on the inside, Cushenberry, was getting double-team help on Tuitt with Glasgow. As the snap happens, T.J. Watt, and I understand T.J. Watt's very, very good, but he makes Elijah Wilkinson over on that right tackle spot look like a traffic cone. In the blink of an eye, he is around him, and he's gone all the way around. It's not pushed him over or anything. He just ran right around him like he wasn't there. Now, if you look at that, Glasgow saw it. He saw that Wilkinson wasn't going to be able to catch up and tried to pivot, thinking if he could help with it, realizing way too late for him to help with it. So he continued his double onto it with Cushenberry, and they did an effective job there. So Wilkinson gets blown by with Watt. Locke, of course, rolls out to his right, tries to avoid Watt, kind of gets tripped up and stumbles. And then that might have been okay. Tough to tell, but might have been okay. The other problem is Bud Dupree, all the way on the other side, basically does a bit of a stutter step. Garrett Bowles backs up to get ready to block Dupree. Dupree then just basically takes off at a 45-degree angle, undercuts Garrett Bowles, goes right under where he was standing, blows through everybody because basically there's no one there. Once he moves away from Bowles, Bowles takes 2 steps back, assuming Dupree's going to crash into him. Dupree doesn't crash into him. He basically just cuts to the inside, pursues Locke, clobbers Locke, knocks the ball loose. Locke gets hurt, and that's it. On that play, Royce Freeman was in the backfield, and there was a 5th guy, but he was guarding Freeman. So Freeman hesitated on that snap. The player did not blitz, and so Freeman then leaked out to go ahead and get a pass, and he took that man in coverage with him. So this was just a 4-man rush. In the end, 4 men on 5 guys. And I said that the inside part of this line is going to be much improved. Reisner's extraordinary. Reisner just cleaned off Cameron Hayward. That's not easy. Took him right out of the play. And Cushenberry and Glasgow did well with Tuitt, who gives a lot of people problems too. The question about it, of course, is what do you do with Glasgow in that case? If you're the Broncos, if you're Pat Shurmur, if you're Mike Munchak, should you be thinking about we should give Wilkinson more help because of Watt? Well, in this case, it wouldn't have mattered because Watt went to the outside. So if you're thinking, wow, if Glasgow would have helped to double team Watt, maybe that would have helped. It wouldn't have, because Wilkinson's foot speed in this case with Watt is just too slow. Glasgow could have immediately pushed to his right up next to Wilkinson, and it would have mattered because Watt still flew around the outside. And then maybe Cushenberry in his second start has a problem with a guy like Stephon Tuitt. So because of the Broncos' failures at the tackle position, and in this particular play, both tackles failed. Both tackles completely failed. Both tackles basically whiffed. You had a situation where neither your left tackle, Garrett Bowles, or your right tackle, Elijah Wilkinson, even got a hand on the guy they were supposed to be blocking. Not until it was way too late. Garrett Bowles finally came into the picture after the fumble was recovered. You saw him down there. But Bowles' block, if you have to go look at it, Wilkinson gets all the flack. But if T.J. Watt just trips up Drew Lock and he stumbles awkwardly and that's the sack, the Broncos don't fumble. It's quite possible Locke isn't hurt, but Dupree ends up beating Garrett Bowles, fooling Garrett Bowles, and is able to come with a head of steam right into Drew Lock. And that's how the injury happened. That was it. And in case you think that was new, that was the one sack on Lock. When you look over at the game, Jeff Driscoll got sacked 6 more times. 6 more times. I mean, think of that. They gave up 7 sacks yesterday, 19 quarterback hits, and lost their starting quarterback. Most of those taking advantage of Garrett Bowles and Elijah Wilkinson. So you look at all the injuries and think, well, maybe if the Broncos didn't have those injuries, if they didn't, then what? It's amazing how low we've set the bar for Garrett Bowles, because there were tons of people today out on the old Twitter saying, look how Garrett Bowles got better. That's a silver lining. What, because he only got called for 1 penalty? That doesn't mean that's not better. The bar is, he didn't do a good job blocking. Ended up getting Drew Lock smashed. And now he's out probably until after the bye. And the Broncos can't do anything about it. They don't have a backup for Garrett Bowles. They've basically never had a backup for Garrett Bowles, ever since he's got onto the team. Elijah Wilkinson is a nice backup, but he's exposed when he plays too often. The speed's just not there. Same problem with Bowles. People just run right around him. Can the Broncos realistically go to Calvin Anderson? He's the only other tackle on the roster. DeMar Dotson's been out on the right his whole career. You're not going to move him over to left. So it's Calvin Anderson. I don't know where you go. And this is frustrating. And it's frustrating for fans. And it's frustrating for the Broncos' best lineman. Because on that play, and on many plays, Dalton Risner is going one-on-one against a guy in the middle. And oftentimes, that guy does nothing. And for Risner, these kind of performances are simply unacceptable. Listen to him after the game yesterday. Well, obviously they do. And there's really not much Risner can do. The Broncos are basically putting Risner out on an island every time because they know we can handle it. They're not quite doing that with Cushenberry yet. They may have to because they don't have any options. They can put DeMar Dotson in. He's 34 years old. You could put Calvin Anderson in. He's 2 years out of Texas. Maybe. How much worse can it be? This is the challenge for the Broncos. Everything they wanted to do, and I talked about this all offseason, right here on this show, because the Broncos didn't address the tackle position. All the things they wanted to do, right? All these speedy wide receivers, all this sort of stuff. None of it matters. What kind of catching that Melvin Gordon can get out of the backfield? None of that matters. Because you can't protect your quarterback. And if you can't protect your quarterback, you certainly can't go hit KJ Hamler 50 yards down the field because you don't have time to make that throw. And the Broncos should have known this. The breakdowns that you really saw yesterday weren't breakdowns because of injury. It wasn't like they were missing anybody. That wasn't the problem. The line had its starters. That offensive line had all 5 of its starters. And Risner was terrific. And Glasgow was fine, and Cushenberry was fine, but Bowles and Wilkinson were disastrous. 7 sacks, almost 20 quarterback hits. It's amazing that Driscoll made it through the game. He got sacked 6 times. That's why I was so impressed with how he played. They dropped him into an almost hopeless situation, and he went 18 for 34, 256 yards and 2 touchdowns. I thought he did well, and I don't think the Broncos have a better option. I think you have to roll with Jeff Driscoll. And there's nobody left. What do you think? RamosLaw.com text line is 303-713-1043. For the Broncos, what's the plan? What can they do? The problems with the tackle position, and this is what I've warned about, the problems with the tackle position cannot be addressed until the offseason. They can't. It doesn't go. There's no way to fix it. Those guys aren't out there. And this is something they should have known was the concern. And I hope KJ Hamler has a terrific career. I hope he's phenomenal. I hope he's absolutely everything the Broncos hoped. And he looked pretty good given the circumstances yesterday. 7 targets, 3 catches, 48 yards, 16 per. The only guy that had a longer yards per catch was Cortland Sutton. And he's done for the year. So I hope it all works out for KJ Hamler. But here's the truth of the matter. They didn't need KJ Hamler. KJ Hamler for the Broncos was like putting spinning rims on a flat tire. Looks cool, but you're not going anywhere with it because all the stuff you want to use Hamler's speed for, you have to protect your quarterback. And they needed to go get a tackle in the second round. Ezra Cleveland and Josh Jones were still there when Hamler was there in the second round and the Broncos picked him. Both guys had near first-round grades. One of them, after this week, would have been starting. I don't know which side. But you would have had either one of those guys. We'd be talking about week 3 right here. At bare minimum, Josh Jones or Ezra Cleveland would be one of your starting tackles against the Buccaneers. I assure you that would be the case. That's what we'd be talking about if they weren't starting already. The way this Broncos team now is constructed, they can run the ball. Melvin Gordon had 70 yards, 3.7 per. That's not bad. That's actually just about his career average of 3.8. And you know he was getting all the attention. Royce Freeman looked good. He had burst. The Broncos ran for 104 yards and 4 yards a carry. And they can do that with delays. They can do that in a lot of different ways. You don't have to necessarily line up in a power eye to get yards. But as far as the way this runs, it's really hard to think of a team the Broncos are going to outscore. What they can do is what they did here. They kept themselves afloat by continuing to move the chains forward, to run the ball, to do what they could. Driscoll, I think, was very good. And they kept the game close. That game didn't feel like it should have been a 5-point margin. That game felt like a 2-touchdown loss. And you look up at that scoreboard and you see it's 5. So that's a good sign. But sustainably, how many points can they realistically put on the board? It looks like the running game is better. They certainly can run on the inside, and this offensive line is not a bad run-blocking offensive line. Obviously, when you're an offensive lineman, you like that first step to be forward. You're the one initiating the contact. You're the one driving the guy down. You're the one going ahead and creating those holes. You get to choose. The Broncos' offensive line as a running line is fine. It's not special, but it's fine. Steelers' defense is pretty good, and they averaged 4 yards a carry. Okay. But who are you going to beat in 2020 with a running-based offense? I'm not suggesting that they just start going arena ball. In fact, if you've ever listened to this show before, you know I don't want that. My main argument about their loss last week was why were they not running at the goal line with Melvin Gordon? The first game of the year last week, they had 3 plays from the 1. 2 of them were passes. They paid Melvin Gordon $8 million a year for the next 2 years to do exactly the kind of thing they didn't let him do. So this offensive identity is definitely in flux. And under Driscoll, it's going to be limited. Driscoll played well and had 6 sacks. I know that not everybody is the Pittsburgh D. I know that not everybody lines up on a 4-man rush. Not everybody can go with Tuitt and Hayward and Watt and Dupree. It's fortunate for the Broncos. But what broke this team down wasn't the injuries. And that's what's so strange to look at. Because I think fans look at this game and say, well, yeah, they're really beat up. They are. And that had a factor. Look, would they have been a better team with Von Miller? Yeah. Would it have been nice to put some pressure on Ben Roethlisberger? Yes, it would have. Would it have been nice to have A.J. Boye out there instead of Michael Ojemudia? Yes. Although I think Ojemudia looked pretty good too. I know he got beat for a touchdown. I know he dropped a sure interception. He's a third rounder and it's his second game. And by the way, playing in college, he played a pure zone. So given that, I think Ojemudia was fine. Quite frankly, you look at the Broncos picks. Jerry Jeudy looks great. I don't expect perfection. He looks special. KJ Hamler looked good. Lloyd Cushenberry looks good. Ojemudia looks good. So far, so good with those top 4 picks. The problem is the Broncos didn't address the position they needed to make that offense go. And that was the tackle spot. And because of it, their offense broke down, and now their quarterback is hurt. And that goes straight to the tackles. And this problem simply cannot be fixed until the offseason. And it's funny because John Elway, like every general manager, loves to be able to have that poker face when it comes to the offseason or when it comes to the draft, right? But we could go in all sorts of different directions. Not now. The 31 other teams, wherever Denver ends up picking, knows full well Denver has to get a tackle. They probably have to get 2. Because next year they'll have Juwan James back. His contract assures it. But we already know that you don't have any idea what you'll get out of Juwan James. So you probably need 2. And the idea of the Broncos getting to be coy and have that poker face and fool people into what they might be drafting so you can make a trade, so you can maneuver, whatever it is you're doing. Everyone knows. Everyone knows. It's just that simple. It was like watching Miami, right? And it was like, oh, Miami could go in a lot of different directions. No, they weren't. They were going to go for Tagovailoa, and everyone knew it. Fortunately, they were high enough to make it happen. But when you have holes that are that obvious, they have to be addressed. The Broncos' holes are at the tackle position on both sides. And until there is a way for this team to do what they need to do at that position, their ceiling is always going to be very low, no matter how good Jerry Jeudy is, or KJ Hamler is, or Noah Fant, who quite frankly looks like the Broncos' best offensive player in the last 2 games. Simply put, looks like the best offensive player they've got. They need to find a way to get it to him more than they do, by the way. But there's only so much any of them can do if you can't block. Can you bring more tight ends in? Yeah, you can. Probably should. Probably need some help there. But you bring basically your 6 linemen, 7 linemen. Need to play a lot of tight ends. That's what you have signed Nick Vannett for. He's basically got to be another tackle for you. Because the Steelers knew exactly how to exploit Bowles and Wilkinson. Now, not every team has a TJ Watt who can rocket around the edge. But you know what? The team they're playing next does. His name's Shaquille Barrett. You might remember him from the Denver Broncos. Last year he had 19 and a half sacks. If you were to ask me the surest thing that will happen, the absolute surest thing that will happen next week in this entire week. And by the way, the Buccaneers beat the Panthers last week. If you were to ask me the one thing I would guarantee, the entire NFL, certainly in that Broncos game, Shaq Barrett's getting a sack next week. Count on it. He's walking away with 1 at bare minimum. Bare minimum. This Tampa Bay team had 10 tackles for loss and 5 sacks on Sunday. And now they're going to face that Broncos line with the backup quarterback, no Cortland Sutton, probably no Phillip Lindsay. Okay, Good luck. Somebody at least give Jeff Driscoll a blindfold and a cigarette before he takes the first snap. That's what the Broncos are facing. That's the reality of it. So there are good things to take away from it. And we'll flip the script. I want to know what you think about this. RamosLaw.com text line is 303-713-1043. I'm going to assemble the text that we get, read some of them on air. But I want you to hear from Brandon Stokley, who had a comment on Noah Fant that's really worth listening to. So we'll do that next. Well, there were good things. There were good things in the Broncos game, right? I mean, they lost. They're 0-2. Broncos haven't started a season 0-2 since the little bit. It's not common. Of course, a little bit being last year. So that's the it's not something that they've done a lot. If you go all the way back to the NFL AFL merger, the Broncos have only started 0-2 a handful of times. And then you get this again following the 0-4 start. The Broncos can find themselves sunk in a hurry. And look, they probably will. But what I've talked about before, the idea that the Broncos weren't going to win the Super Bowl. I was supposedly the guy that's all negative about it. I'm not negative about it. They weren't going to win the Super Bowl this year. It was going to be a struggle to make the playoffs. When Von Miller got hurt, then they weren't even going to make the playoffs. But that wasn't necessarily what this season's about anyway. This season is about building. And they have to find a way to obtain talent and build it. And like I mentioned, Jerry Jeudy looks extraordinary. I don't expect him to be the finished version of himself in 2 games, but he looks very special. Hamler's speed looks disruptive, which is good. Whether I think they needed him or not is irrelevant. He looked pretty good. And given those that hamstring injury that's sometimes problematic for the speed guys, I'm okay with it. Cushenberry immediately took the starting job at center. And there were moments where we had been hearing about Patrick Morris being able to be the guy that was going to take that job. I mean, that's really what you're at. And he was immediately erased from the equation. Ojemudia has, in my opinion, outperformed my expectations at this stage. His man coverage was always going to be a work in progress because it was basically non-existent coming out of Iowa. It's not what they ran. Ever. I think that's been good. Now, we haven't seen McTelvin Ajim. We haven't seen Albert Okawebanam. Justin Sternad got hurt. Natani Moody's kind of a project as a backup. And you're looking at your 7th rounders, Tyree Cleveland and Derek Tuska, and no significant impact there yet. But when you take a look at the young players and how they're going to continue to build forward, because this is where the Broncos' future is, right? Those guys are the future. So when you're seeing in the 3rd round and you hope to get most of your starters in the first 3 rounds, that's what you're generally hoping for. So following the disastrous, the 2016 and 2017 drafts were just a mess. 2016, fortunately, you plucked Justin Simmons out of that in the 3rd round. And you got a little lucky with Connor McGovern in the 5th. He's since moved on. But since those drafts, I mean, you have to go look at the top 3 for a while there. I mean, you have to go back and look at it, and it's a nightmare. But in the last 3 years, the Broncos have done a lot better. Here are their top 3-round picks over the last 3 drafts. Now, I mentioned Jeudy, Hamler, Ojemudia, and Cushenberry. We haven't seen Ajim yet. But the top 4, we're only 2 games in, but that looks pretty good. 2019, Noah Fant. Yep. Dalton Reisner. Oh, yeah. You redraft that, Reisner goes in the top half of the 1st round. Drew Lock. Okay. Draymond Jones. Okay. Unfortunately, now Lock and Jones are hurt. 2018, Bradley Chubb. Well, great. He got hurt all last year, but no question about the ability. Cortland Sutton. He's great. He's unfortunately hurt and out for the year. And then Royce Freeman and Isaac Yiadom in the 3rd. Yiadom, of course, traded at the end of training camp this year, and Freeman is the number 3 back. So not exactly the starter you had hoped, but again, he's on the team and he's useful. So the last 3 drafts for the Broncos, especially in those top 3 rounds where you hope to get starters, have been pretty productive. The problem is there just hasn't been as much depth because the previous 4 or 5 years of that, it's been a disaster. You've had drafts where it started with Paxton Lynch and Adam Gotsis, or Shane Ray and Tyson Brilo, or Bradley Roby and Cody Latimer, or Sylvester Williams and Monte Ball. I mean, these are the toppers of those previous drafts. And for the Broncos, now that they have youth, not as much as they need, certainly not as much depth, but the young players looked good. And Noah Fant in particular looks really good. And he looked really good last year working with 3 different quarterbacks. The funny thing is, Fant seems to be limited this year, not by his ability or not even by his quarterback, but by the play calling. Earlier today, Brandon Stokley talked about what he saw from the Broncos' young tight end. Yeah, and we've talked about that before, too. We had our little theoretical Thursday last week where we talked about the idea of what happens if they pick Devin Bush instead of Noah Fant. The truth is you probably don't have Dalton Reisner and you don't have Lloyd Cushenberry because you got to remember the parts of those trades that came back to Denver. I think they still picked Drew Lock probably with the first of those back-to-back picks in the second and probably not Reisner. But by making that trade down and getting Noah Fant instead of Devin Bush, you got Fant, Reisner, and Cushenberry. Think of where the offensive line would be without those guys. Oh, my goodness. I mean, it's barely 3 Mississippi at the NFL level. But Noah Fant looks terrific. We know that Pat Shurmur has had success with tight ends. Noah Fant looks like an Evan Ingram type. He is that kind of guy. And he is a matchup problem. And as he continues to gain confidence, he's going to be more and more dangerous. The Broncos need to be utilizing him even more than they are. With Courtland Sutton being out for the year, they need to be throwing him the ball a ton. Jerry Jeudy had 7 targets along with with KJ Hamler. Tim Patrick and Fant had 5. Courtland Sutton had 6. Those are gone now. No options there. Who do you want him to go to? You want him to go to Tim Patrick? You want him to go to Deshaun Hamilton? They should switch between 2 people. Those targets that Courtland Sutton had need to go to Noah Fant and Melvin Gordon. That's where they need to go. And it would not bother me at all if Noah Fant is the leading guy in targets every single game for the Denver Broncos. It would not. And it's not as strange as you might think. No, he's not Rob Gronkowski. No, he's not Travis Kelce. Not yet, and probably not ever. But you're talking about Hall of Fame type guys. But is Noah Fant potentially in the Zach Ertz level, the Evan Ingram level, the Darren Waller level? Yeah, he is. And those guys tend to lead their team in targets. So I'd have no problem with that. That's one of the great things that came out of this. The fact that the Broncos were able to get some players that really do look impactful. Now, this team can't really put everything together to take advantage of it all this season. But it doesn't mean that they can't continue to learn, continue to grow, and continue to improve. The more they do so, the better off this team will be when they are hopefully healthier next year, and quite likely with probably a more favorable schedule. So not all is lost for the Denver Broncos. It just depends on what your expectations are. And I know that the thought process will be, well, you're lowering their expectations. Well, no, I didn't think they'd even make the playoffs. I still think they don't make the playoffs. So what does that mean? I get the fact that you'd love to be in it till the last week. And that was my hope for the Broncos. They'd be right in it until the last week of the hunting for a wild card. That's probably not going to happen. Okay. But if they go 7-9 and just miss the wild card by one, or in this case, they go 4-12, 5-10. It doesn't truly have much impact on the Broncos' future. The future can still be built now. You'd like to build it in wins, but it doesn't mean you can't build it in wins. The idea that you can still take something out of this, especially with so many young players, I want to let you hear from Michael Ojemudia. We'll do that next. The challenges for a rookie, any rookie, in getting used to the NFL with its game speed, physicality, you name it, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to get caught up with. And when you try to do it on the fly, well, there can be challenges. And in this particular game, Michael Ojemudia had his challenges as well. In the last couple games, obviously, he has been significantly pressed. And as you expect, that's a lot to ask for any young player to go ahead and make those kind of jumps and those kind of leaps in any sort of single season, let alone any sort of single game. So when you are looking at a player like Michael Ojemudia now, so who did not play in college in a man-to-man system out at Iowa, and he didn't do it, and there were questions going into the combine about what his potential would be. He's a bright guy, he's a talented guy, and he's a hardworking guy. So there is a ton to like about Michael Ojemudia, but he's been asked and been put in a very, very difficult situation. And AJ Boye being hurt, one of the other challenges that I have talked to about it is the fact that we're looking at the tackles. You also need to be looking very much at the cornerback position. That is the other position in which the Broncos simply did not address it. And because they did not address that particular spot, you're running into the same challenges with these guys because they simply did not give themselves the opportunity to buy their players some time. And Ojemudia is one of them. So he had some bumps in the road in this particular game. Naturally, a guy like Ben Roethlisberger is going to pick on him, right? If you're Ben Roethlisberger and you're looking at the Broncos in the week you're prepping, you're like, well, they weren't really expecting to roll that guy out for as many snaps as they've had to, but he's hurt. So they've got to do what they've got to do. And Ojemudia is out there, and of course Roethlisberger is going to pick on him. And he gave up a touchdown. I ended up dropping an interception. But after the game, what you heard from Ojemudia is exactly what you want to hear. Here's what he said about that touchdown he gave up. Well, this is part of the growing experience. Again, you heard him talk about it. That was his man. That's what he didn't do in Iowa. He was not asked to do that. And that's not his fault. That's the scheme they run at Iowa. One of the differences that you have to make when you jump to the NFL, when you're a college coach in a college organization, you can go get the players you want to play the plays you design. You have a system, great. You want to go get this particular corner that's this size, that does this, that moves laterally, and the fact that he doesn't need to be man-to-man, that's okay. You can just recruit that person. There's no salary cap. There's no draft. You just go get the person you want. And in the NFL, you can't do that. So Ojemudia gets put in a position where he's just not that experienced yet. And he ends up giving up the touchdown. And he gets Claypool, and that's the way it works. But he understands that this is part of that learning experience for him. And that's the only thing you can do, right? You can identify what the problem was, which is what Ojemudia did. And then you can look at it and say, I've identified it. I'm going to learn. I will improve. And he talked about it where the bumpy spots gave him something to learn from. The truth of the matter is getting into football or any sport it is no different than learning anything else you do. You go to work and you have to, you file something in a particular way you have to learn how to do it. And the first time, you probably don't get it right. You have to mess it up. And then someone can help you and you can try it again. You're like, okay, now I know what I'm doing. Well, that's the way Ojemudia talked about this particular game. Jerry Jeudy in week 1 had a couple of bad drops. And he talked about how those bad drops basically helped him in the future. This is kind of what Ojemudia is dealing with. The expectations on him were very different than Jerry Jeudy, but he's being asked to take a bunch of snaps now due to the injuries. And the Broncos didn't do much of the cornerback position either in the offseason. They didn't make a draft pick. They didn't add anyone in free agency. They could have grabbed, let's say, a Prince of Mukamara or even a Logan Ryan. They didn't make those moves. So now Ojemudia is kind of thrown into the deep end, and they're hoping he can swim. The bright side is when you have these games, especially as a rookie, if the effort is there, if you're trying your best, if you've been listening to the coaching, if you've been listening to what your teammates have been trying to tell you, generally, they can live with it because they were probably there too when they were rookies. And Ojemudia did confirm that, of course, his teammates feel the same way. He had an interception in week 1. It was called off due to Alexander Johnson's very ill-advised penalty. In this game, he could have had another one. Probably should have had another one. Hit him in the hands. Would have loved to have come down with it. That happens too. But here's a guy that finished with 7 tackles, second on the team, and was asked to do a lot more than you'd expect. And yeah, he had a rough day. Gave up a touchdown pass, dropped a would-be pick, but it wasn't disastrous, especially given what the Broncos should be expecting of their third rounder at this point. But what you like is the aggressive attitude, because it's what Ojemudia said about next week that was maybe the most telling. And that's against Tom Brady, by the way. So that's not exactly the easiest pull, per se. But that mindset is what you want. And as this Broncos season goes on, and it's going to be ugly for a while, as it goes on, those little things are what you want to see. I've referenced the quote before. The great John Wooden, the basketball coach at UCLA, famously said, first you lose big, then you lose small, then you win small, then you win big. There aren't any steps you can skip. It's the very rare player who can just walk in and dominate. John Elway tried to take a snap from his guard once, okay? When he was a rookie. He lined up under guard. Nobody walks in and dominates the league. Everybody makes mistakes. It's normal. It happens. And the truth of the matter is, unless it happens, the player probably never reaches their peak. Because you have to make the mistake to know what you can fix and to know how you can improve. And for the Broncos, the best way to look at this season, for the fans, the best way to look at this season is now those young Broncos steps become very cheap. Because if they cost you a touchdown to Chase Claypool in a game against the Steelers, if they end up costing a play here and there, even a game here and there, if you're the Broncos now, truth of the matter is you can afford it. Because your team wasn't going anywhere this year. It's worse to have those guys make those mistakes when you're in a playoff run because they have to learn. In this case, the Broncos' young players can make the mistakes. If Jerry Jeudy makes another drop here and there, okay. If he's learning from it, so what? And when Drew Lock comes back, probably at the midway point of the season, say the same thing about him. This is an opportunity for the Broncos to get better without risking a season. So you have to find the positives in that and take a look at that. That's one of the positives. This team was building. This was a building year. They can still do that. It's just going to require a little more patience from fans. Take a look at the Denver Nuggets trying to stay alive after a heartbreaking Game 2 loss. We'll take a look at what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. Can they turn it around tomorrow night against LeBron, Anthony Davis, and the Lakers? We'll discuss next. Well, that happened. Not really sure what you're supposed to do about that. The Nuggets did everything they could. Nikola Jokic actually got the hand up in Davis's face, and he nails it anyway. I mean, there's only so much you can do when you're facing a 6'10" guy who can bomb fadeaway threes. That's unfortunately, but that's the problem. And just horrible luck for the Nuggets. The truth is they were fantastic. Jokic was great. He scored 11. Remember, he scored 11 points in the final 2 minutes and 42 seconds. I mean, that's an amazing thing to see him stick with it. And of course, everyone knew on that last play there were only two guys that were going to get it. It was either LeBron or Davis. They're the only two. End of story. They're the only people you have to guard. They're the only guys that were going to take that shot. And the Nuggets said they had a little bit of miscommunication. Plumlee and Jeremy Grant ended up on LeBron James. So Jokic had to try to handle it, but he had a good contest. There's only so much you can do about it. This is a Nuggets team that when you look at the way they lost in the first game, I thought they did everything they could. They were down 70-54 with 8 minutes left in that third quarter, roughly. And they were still down 8 with 3 minutes left. And then Jokic just went bonkers. Did just about everything. And without him, they're really not even close. It's going to be hard to see them beat the Lakers down 2-0. I said it before. All I wanted the Nuggets to do in this series is not get swept. That's all I'm looking for. I understand they're not as good as the Lakers. I understand that even though Nikola Jokic is spectacular and Jamal Murray is playing terrific basketball, they're not LeBron and Anthony Davis. They're just not. And basketball is a top-heavy sport. If you have those guys that can do those sort of things, you're in trouble. And the Nuggets gave this one their all. Watching the game 3 tomorrow, watching what they do, watching how they react to it, will tell everything. Not only for this series, but probably for their future. They know that they could have beaten the Lakers and even the series at 1. They know they could have. Just good luck by the Lakers. Sometimes you have to tip your cap. Anthony Davis made a great shot. He that's all you can do. He made a tough shot, a tough contested shot. Sometimes the other guys get you. They get paid too. And the Nuggets know they could beat them, but it took everything Jokic had to drag them back in the last few minutes. Now, maybe they learned something from that because all of a sudden, with that late part of the game, Jokic got really loose. He was taking advantage of smaller defenders, and then when they sent double teams, he was dishing it out the way he does and finds a way to get as much of this team going at the very end. But it's just not quite enough. And that's what it's going to end up for the Nuggets. It's not going to be quite enough. They're not quite good enough to beat the Lakers. But the window is opening. And how they respond in this game is going to matter a lot. There's a big difference between losing 4-1 to the Lakers and LeBron James and getting swept. That's why they have to find a way to take one of them. Take 2 is great. If you can force the Lakers to 6, that's tremendous. But you got to find a way to take 1. Because then you know you can beat them. And if you know you can beat them once, then that's the next step to beating them 4 times. And next year, when the Nuggets are healthier, remember they still don't have Will Barton, and believe me, I'm not of the thought process that Will Barton is one of the very best players in the league. But if they had him yesterday in a game that they lost on only the last shot, do you think Will Barton's worth 3 more points in a game? Yeah, you bet he is. So they probably win that if they're healthy. So when they're healthier, when they get a little more experience, Michael Porter Jr. may end up being the 3rd star. All indications is he will be. The Nuggets just have to find a way to incorporate him and use him. And in the offseason, I presume they'll do that. But this team has to be able to fight back. It will be way too easy to realize you played your very best to fight your way back. And that's what they did. They just scraped. They were down 8 with 3 minutes to go. And then you lose that way. It's heartbreaking. And it's very easy to understand that you're probably not climbing out of this hole. And the Nuggets probably understand they're probably not climbing out of that hole. Doesn't mean they won't try. Doesn't mean they won't do their best. Doesn't mean they're going to give up. If there's one thing you've seen about this team, they don't do that. And that's a great sign. But it's going to be very difficult to come out there and believe that you have a chance to win the series, because you really don't. But how they fight is going to be very, very important, because it gives them an idea of what they need to do next time, and it gives them an idea of what they can do going forward. So I'm excited to see it. It's not as if this is kind of the lesson for tonight, isn't it? The idea that the Broncos, with the injuries that they have, likely dooms them. They were already a long shot to make the playoffs, but now it's nearly impossible. And that's sort of the lesson for tonight. The fans that look at things in a binary fashion, you won a championship or you didn't, and that's the only measurement of success. Well, not only is that going to be a really disappointing way to be a fan, because you can be a fan of whomever you like, okay? That's great. You can be a fan of the Patriots, and they have a whole pile of rings, but they still don't win it every year. They don't even win it half of the time. Over Tom Brady's entire career, they didn't even win it a third of the time. I mean, keep that in mind. So that's too shallow a way to look at sport. It's the building. It's the understanding that you have all these seasons and you have an opportunity for these guys to get better in their career and open a window. The Nuggets' window is opening. I understand that LeBron James is amazing. One of the best players that's ever played. But LeBron's 35. He'll be 36 next season. I mean, eventually he'll maybe stop dropping triple doubles all the time. At the age of 35, he still averaged 25.3 and 10.2 assists per game. But Father Time catches up to everybody. And they can't rule the roost forever. Don't know what's going to happen with Anthony Davis. I presume he'll re-sign for a whole pile of money, but I don't know. He's going to have options all over the place. Maybe if he gets his ring this year, maybe he wants to go do something else. Be the top dog on his team instead of the number 2. Because as long as LeBron James is there, Anthony Davis is Robin. Maybe he wants to be Batman. You don't know. And if that happens, then where does that leave the Nuggets? So even if they don't win this series, it doesn't mean that it's not a good thing. They just need one game against the Lakers. Anything beyond that is gravy. Just a game, and all of a sudden, their future looks far brighter. It will be a rather tumultuous offseason for the Nuggets, but they will know that their core, Jokic and Murray, hopefully Jeremy Grant, they need to re-sign him, but the expectation is they will. That's why they traded so much to get him. Gary Harris, Michael Porter Jr. I think Harris has shown his importance ever since he came back from injury. But when you get those pieces together, they want to know that they can go do this. So winning one of these games is imperative. And coming as close as they did, it just doesn't quite count, because you still feel like you just can't get past that guy. I don't know if you were like me, but all the way out in elementary school and even in teen years, I'm out playing sports with somebody, and no matter what sport, right? I can go out and play basketball with someone, and there's that one guy I could just never beat. I could get close, and I couldn't beat him. We could play baseball, and this one guy was the one guy I could never hit. Just the way it worked. And all you needed was something to happen to realize, okay, it's the old Arnold Schwarzenegger from Predator. If it bleeds, we can kill it. I mean, that's basically what it is. You have to be able to know that you can get them. So hopefully the Nuggets can get that done tomorrow and maybe make this a little more interesting of a series. I think the result probably is what it is. And I'd love to hold on to hope and say, yeah, sure, they're going to come back from 0-2 and knock out the Lakers. Realistically, though, no, they're probably not. And that, too, is okay. This is the kind of season that you hope to see. So for the Nuggets and now for the Broncos, they find themselves in sort of a similar boat where the ending is probably already written. And for the Broncos, unfortunately, it's happening a lot earlier. The Nuggets get a very deep, very long run before reality kind of smacks them in the face. But in this particular situation, they're in the same boat. The Broncos' window is opening. In the NFL, you can open a window a lot more quickly than you can when talking about the NBA, where 6 teams are the Globetrotters and everyone else is the Generals every year. The NFL, you run your team right, you can be one of the worst teams in the league, and 4 years later, you can be competing for a Super Bowl. That's just the truth. And it's frustrating that the Broncos are where they are because you're probably thinking 4 years, 1, 2. Hey, yeah, I get it. I do. I understand. But for this Broncos team, that's the same thing they're facing with the Nuggets. The ending is most likely written. But how you get there spend that time defines what you will be going forward. And for the Broncos, that should be the goal for this year. It is really unfortunate that Drew Lock got hurt. And for a guy that you need to see him play, that's really unfortunate. But the rest of the other guys, they still have things they can build. Over on the RamosLaw.com text line, that's 303-713-1043. I want to make sure that I look at some of these texts here from the 406. I don't think we have to tank to get a top 5 draft pick. I think we're going to get a stud offensive lineman. Well, that would be good. I don't know about the top 5 draft pick, how good that would be, but the lineman from the 560, yeah, the Broncos just lay down and die. Tank the season. It's over. Pack it in. Just start all the rookies. Play the third strings. The whole season's over. So little gloom and doom there from our friend Mile High Man, but I get it. From the 232, the Broncos season went from 7-9 to 8-8 best case to probably 5-11 or so. I like a lot of things about the future, but this year's going to be tough, but you never shut it down. It's the NFL. I get that. I think that's very good. I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. Talking about the Broncos line challenges, talking about Tyler Polumbus, who talked about the injury on the drive and said that Garrett Bowles had messed up and it made others look bad. Well, I gave you a full breakdown of what happened there, and there was enough blame to go around, I would say, on the particular lock injury. Elijah Wilkinson got blown by. I mean, it's TJ Watt, I get it, but still. An idea of maybe trading for a quarterback, suggesting that maybe, seeing how well Derek Carr has played, in case you didn't see him tonight, dealing and knocking off the Saints, the favored Saints, by the way, which matters when you're in Vegas, where the Raiders are now, in a jet black stadium where the desert is 115 degrees. So I'm a little, I don't know how that works. Smarter people than me have to figure out why that's painted black, unless it reflects or something. Anyway, Derek Carr did great. And the idea of maybe Marcus Mariota competing with him might be the case there. So one of our texters suggests that maybe you offer a mid-rounder for Marcus Mariota and try to salvage the season. I wouldn't do that because I don't think it makes a difference. If you're the Broncos, as it stands right now, Phillip Lindsay's probably out for a few weeks. You want Drew Lock to play when Drew Lock is healthy. So, no Courtland Sutton. You know the line isn't very good. You really want to bring in Mariota for what would be 5 weeks and do what? possibly improve your draft position because he's not going to get you into the playoffs. I appreciate the never say die attitude. But if it's me, I'm not trading for Marcus Mariota in the hopes that he can somehow salvage anything. I just don't see that as being a very good fit. Is someone basically disagreeing about the idea that the Broncos didn't do anything about the tackle position, pointing out Juwan James was healthy and expected to play before the draft. That's true. It's absolutely true. And the Broncos ended up paying that bill. But that was the risk. And you have to find a way to get yourself potentially more depth, and they didn't have it. So from the 427, Sean, you're absolutely right. That's 2 games we gave up, I believe, because they did not utilize Gordon and Freeman at critical times where they should have gone to the run game. Sincerely believe we would have won those 2 games if they had just done that, and they may not have been pretty wins, but they could have won and they'd be 2-0, maimed as they are, or progressively became injured quarter by quarter. Still have 2 wins, and it's unbelievable that they didn't call as many running plays in the first game and the second game. Yes, that's absolutely true. I don't think they would. I disagree. I think that the idea of the Broncos going 2-0, look, they could have conceivably won the first game. I don't really know if they could have won this one. I don't buy that. I don't think that's the case. But I do think they need to run more because they've been more successful at it. From the 815, the Broncos' offensive line has been a problem since Peyton Manning. He was able to cover it up because how quickly he could get the ball out. Every other quarterback since then has not been able to cover up those deficiencies. Every year it's the same thing. Draft offensive or defensive talent except for the left and right tackles. Everyone looking at the Broncos has known the Bulls has been an issue for years, and still nothing has been done about it. Well, hard to argue that. From our 270, do you think the Broncos are targeting Trevor Lawrence right now? No, I do not. I don't think so. A lot of displeasure with Pat Shurmur in the play calling. That continues as well. So there's some frustration there. A little bit more talking about the running, and I think that's fair as well. So obviously the feelings with the Broncos are pretty frustrating here, and that's obviously a challenge, I think. Somebody suggested Colin Kaepernick. That's not going to happen. I mean, no way whatsoever. Now, a pretty good argument saying that you need a rushing quarterback, pointing out that the top quarterbacks this year are Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, Cam Newton. I don't argue that. The day of the dual threat quarterback is here, as long as you have an offensive coordinator clever enough to do it. Andy Reid was made fun of for well over a decade as some sort of mad scientist. Well, no, Andy Reid knew what he was doing. He just needed the right talent to make it work. So when it comes to Pat Shurmur, the 5th Broncos offensive coordinator in the last 5 years, now he's really got a challenge because you are with a backup quarterback, your best wide receiver is out, your back-to-back 1,000-yard running back is out, though he's not expected to be out as long. So what are you going to do? You have a tight end that looks terrific. They have been able to run out of 3 wide receiver sets. Now, that's interesting, too. Now, to do that, though, consistently, you have to be able to complete the passes. You need to be able to back those guys off so you can run out of it. That means Jeff Driscoll's going to have to make sure that he hits Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler and Noah Fant, and they're going to have to make the catches and do some damage. But now you're talking about a very, very young receiving core. I mean, Jeudy and Hamler and potentially Tyree Cleveland, they're all rookies. Fant's a second-year guy. Okwebenham's a rookie. Jake Butt hasn't been able to stay on the field yet, and it's great that he looks healthy, and there's reasons to be excited about it. I'm delighted he made the team, but we haven't seen it yet. In many ways, he's really kind of a rookie, too, when it comes to experience. And now you have Jeff Driscoll, who's only started a handful of games in his career. So Pat Shurmur is going to have to be very creative in the play calling. And the Broncos are going to need more scripted schemes than they normally would probably like to do, because you have to find a way to slow down the pass rush. Again, 7 sacks, 17 quarterback hits. No quarterback's going to make it very long if that's the case. Driscoll did a fine job. I don't think trading for a quarterback's the answer. I don't think trying to go sign a quarterback is the answer, because I don't think you want anybody to get in Drew Lock's way when he's healthy again, because you still need to find out if he's the guy. All of the indicators there look good. All of them. Every single one. But he's now started 7 games, and he's made it through 6 1/4 in his entire career. You need to see more than that. So you don't want to add a quarterback because you need Drew Lock to start the second he's ready to play. You don't rush him because you're thinking long-term with him, but you need to be able to have him ready to go and have nobody blocking him. So I don't agree with getting a new quarterback. Driscoll can do the job. It's all right. He's not going to win you a game. That's just the truth. And very few backup quarterbacks can. But the schemes that Shermer's going to have to write up, especially starting in this next game, things will get a little easier against the Jets, simply because the Jets are horrible. But for the Broncos, if they're going to stay in this game with Tampa, they have to find a way to keep that game close. And to do that, when they have the ball, they're going to need to be able to back off the blitzes. People can't just continue to bring the house. The Broncos need to find a way to get it done. Now, you can do that in a couple different ways. Some delayed handoffs are a way to do it. You could do that as well. Let them basically overrun the play. Screen passes don't hurt. A couple things the Broncos haven't done a lot of yet. Certainly Shermer has it in his back pocket. He can use it. But the creativity he's going to have to come up with is pretty significant and doesn't have a lot of time to do it. Because realistically, with our insider Mike Kliss saying Drew Lock is out from 2 to 6 weeks, and with Coach Fangio saying it's 3 to 5 weeks, I can tell you what that means. It's 3 to 6 weeks. That's what that is. So when you're getting to that point, that's the bye. So he's going to be out until the bye, barring something really strange. Get a text there just a moment ago from the 580. Personally, I haven't seen anything special from Locke this year. If he doesn't do more by the end of the year, would we not be looking for a new quarterback? Well, maybe. It depends how far south this goes. If the Broncos have a season that is an absolute debacle because of the injuries, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if they were 1-6 at the bye. I really wouldn't. I'd like to think they'll win 2 games. I think they can beat the Jets and the Dolphins, but I don't know. So play it safe, and let's say they take one and lose the other. So you're 1-6 at the bye. You got Atlanta, you got Vegas, then you got the Chargers. Maybe you can steal one against the Chargers. You got the Saints, you got Kansas City again, you got Carolina. Okay, maybe you can beat Carolina. You got Buffalo, you got the Chargers. Let's say you beat them again, and then you got Vegas. So now you're talking 4 or 5 wins. You're not going to be picking low enough to really go get either Lawrence or Fields. Probably the 2 guys that are going to be in that hunt. You're probably not there. Free agency going and getting quarterbacks is a good way to nuke your salary cap. So that's not a particularly good fit either. The Broncos, I think, need to ride out Locke for the rest of the year, but it's a fair question. What if Locke doesn't look spectacular? What if Locke isn't amazing? The truth of the matter is Drew Lock's quarterback rating in the 38 passes he threw was 87.2. Jeff Driscoll's in the 34 he threw was 84.9. Not that different. It's too small a sample size. I'm not going to judge anybody's career on 38 pass attempts. But it's a tough spot for the Broncos. This season was about a lot of evaluating their talent, including evaluating Drew Lock. They cleared the decks to make sure Drew Lock had no competition at quarterback, and they did everything they could to add weapons for him to work with. They really wanted to see him in the best possible light. Fortunately, it looks like they still will be able to, but it won't be a full season's worth. That's football. But yeah, it's fair to say the Broncos don't know yet. And until they do, yeah, you don't have all the answers. The stellar play of Nolan Arenado for the Colorado Rockies might have seen his last days. Will number 28 ever take the field again for Colorado? There is now serious doubt. I'll explain next. The Colorado Rockies win tonight in San Francisco. They take it 7-2. German Marquez with the win tonight. Decent performances from the bullpen. Only Carlos Estevez gave up a run in sort of the Rockies mix and match bullpen that they have at the moment. It wasn't a pretty game when they struck out 11 times, but the power was there. Kevin Pillar with the home run gets the team going, and Elias Diaz with a pair of RBI on the evening as well. So the Rockies stay alive barely. It's touch and go here. They find themselves at 24-29, and they are trying to catch the 8th place spot. And that's the only thing they can realistically get to. And that's even not that realistic. They simply cannot afford 2 more losses. And that's it. In total. That's all they can do. You have to finish 500. I warned everyone of this at the very beginning of this sprint. If you reach 500, you're going to make the playoffs. As it stands, the 16 teams in baseball that are 500 will all make the playoffs. The other teams that are not will all miss the playoffs. It is that straightforward. You're 500, you're going to be in. That's just the way it works. Well, the Phillies are 500. They're at 27-27. The Rockies at 24-29 find themselves in really bad shape. The next up is Milwaukee, but they're trying to catch San Francisco as well. San Francisco is ahead of them. But the Rockies lose 2 more times, forget it. They have no chance. If the Phillies can win 4 more times, the Rockies are most likely out. So they have to continue to just roll all the way through the rest of their schedule. That is not terribly likely, but fortunately, if they can continue to play well against the rest of the series with the Giants, they can find themselves in the mix. Kyle Freeland will pitch tomorrow with basically the season on the line. That's essentially the rest of it. Ryan Castellani will get the game on Wednesday, and the Rockies will finish with those 2. And then they finish the entire season, the entire schedule already. It happens this week against the Arizona Diamondbacks, who are terrible and just playing out the string. So for the Rockies, they have 7 games remaining in their season. They absolutely must win 5 of them to even have a chance. And realistically, they need to win 6 out of 7. So that's going to be very tricky. They'll have a doubleheader on Friday, and that's basically where they stand. So they can afford to lose 1 more game, and they're probably done. They'll have to do it without Nolan Arenado, who was put on the injured list today with a sprained AC joint. That's the injury du jour, apparently. Cortland Sutton had that too before he tore up his knee. And in this case, that may very well spell the end of Nolan Arenado's career in a Colorado Rockies uniform. There is so much of an offseason that is awaiting the Rockies. It will be very interesting. He signed that 8-year, $260 million contract before the 2019 season, and he can opt out following next season. So he can opt out after 2021. Well, he's already publicly fighting with Jeff Bridich and was almost moved in a trade, it seemed like, last offseason. Certainly, teams would love to go get him. He's a 5-time All-Star. He's won 7 Gold Gloves every year he's ever been in the league. And that might be it. And that would be the start of a pretty dark period because there are very few players like Nolan Arenado. And yes, he's had a bad year. He's been playing a little bit dinged up. Shoulder's been sore most of the year. And he's had a bad year. The first bad year he's ever had. Ever. And it's amazing how many people were coming after me on social media saying, well, it doesn't matter because his bat's inconsistent. And look, no, it's not. His bat's not inconsistent. He's having a bad year in this 60-game season. That's like having a bad couple months. You don't back off on Nolan Arenado on June 1st in a normal year, and that's kind of what this season is. So Arenado is probably, even if you include Todd Helton's longevity, probably one of the top 2 players that have ever played. In order for me, it would be Larry Walker, Nolan Arenado, and Todd Helton. That's the order. Arenado's trajectory is the Hall of Fame. It's not very easy to get those level of guys. The Rockies have been playing since 1993. They have one. Arenado was that kind of guy. The idea that he's replaceable is ridiculous. He's not replaceable. Not at all. But it appears that either Arenado's going to have to go or GM Jeff Bridich is going to have to go. And the Rockies organization that is notoriously averse to change in the front office might very well decide to let one of the two best players they've ever had leave in a trade for what? This would be a very sad ending to a Rockies chapter. And the truth of the matter is, I suspect it's going to happen. The Rockies will try to find a way to sneak into the playoffs with an amazing 6-1 run to close out the year. That's what it's going to take. And that may not even be enough. So we'll see. The Denver Broncos, by the way, a little lighter in the pocket. Vic Fangio in particular. The Broncos fined $250,000, and Vic Fangio himself was fined $100,000 for not wearing their masks enough during the game at Pittsburgh. The team was informed this afternoon. That's the largest fine for the Broncos since they were caught fiddling with the salary cap back in 1996. I mean, they were fined a little bit more then. They were fined $950,000. But this is the most since, the $350,000 in fines. And the NFL is deadly serious about this. And they're serious for health reasons because, remember, there's no bubble. You have to make sure you protect the players. There is no bubble. Players and coaches. You have coaches that are of an age in a lot of cases where the COVID-19 could be very dangerous. And it's also about appearances. It needs to look like they're doing their best as well. And the NFL is sort of renowned for making sure that it looks good. But the Broncos are hardly alone. Pete Carroll, Mike Shanahan, they got the same fines. Yeah, pardon me. Thank you, Dylan. Kyle Shanahan. Mike Shanahan, to my knowledge, was not fined. Probably. I don't think so. He wasn't coaching. It's fine. But yes, Kyle Shanahan of the Niners and Pete Carroll were also fined $100,000, and their teams each fined $250,000. More than $1 million of fines came out today to the league because they have needed to reinforce the requirement that the coaches wear the coverings over their mouths and noses at all times. And they warned there would be discipline if they did not comply. It's also worth noting that Bill Belichick did the same thing. And in tonight's game, neither John Gruden nor Sean Payton were really wearing it. Gruden wore it like a chin strap of a hockey helmet all night. So I would imagine they're going to get the fine as well. And Gruden thought that the memo was basically directed at him. And last week, he thought after the warning was sent out, he said, I'm doing my best. I've had the virus. I'm very sensitive about it. I'm calling plays. I want to communicate in these situations. And if I get fined, I'll have to pay the fine. But I'm very sensitive about that, and I apologize. Well, you're probably going to have to pay the fine. These are, I would imagine you'll see that changed for most of those coaches. Teams do not like taking $250,000 hits when they don't need to take $250,000 hits. So I suspect that's going to work pretty well. It is, of course, a sports weekend, a football weekend, and great performances come out of that, including things that happen in particular games and, well, just rewards that came after a long hockey season for a member of the Colorado Avalanche, where there are weekend warriors, and they're next. It is our opportunity to go back and take a look at the weekend in sports and single out the great performers over the course of the weekend. Of course, we'll start with the first one this evening. Didn't play, but got a well-deserved award, and that is Cale Makar of the Colorado Avalanche winning the Calder Trophy. And of course, some of you might be thinking, wait, but didn't he appear in last year's playoffs? Yes, he did. And like baseball, if he didn't appear in enough games, it doesn't count. So he was a rookie this season and pretty closely contested. It was certainly Quinn Hughes or Cale Makar. Makar gets it, and in a COVID-19 based awards ceremony, you still get the best you can. Wayne Gretzky ends up reading the award and interviewing you after you get it. So that's obviously pretty cool too. So congratulations to Cale Makar, well-deserved. His teammate Nathan MacKinnon, by the way, finished second to Leon Draisaitl in the Hart Trophy, which is basically the MVP. But Rookie of the Year this year in the NHL goes to Cale Makar of the Colorado Avalanche, and it is scary to think that he is just barely scratching the surface at the kind of player he can be. It's very exciting for the Avs going into next year, a team that might still be playing right now if Philip Grubauer hadn't gotten hurt. Injuries, story of the year right now, isn't it? Nolan Arenado's out. Grubauer doomed the Avs season. The Broncos have a MASH unit right now of injuries. Ugh, awful. Dylan, who'd you pick?
Well, I actually picked a guy who gave the Avalanche fits in their series with the Dallas Stars. Anton Hudobin gave the Stars fits in Game 1. He made 35 saves on 36 shots. Stars ended up winning 4-1 in Game 1.
Okay. If the Stars win the Stanley Cup, does that make you feel better or worse about the Avs?
Better, because the Stars were in the exact same position that the Avs are in. They were in this position last year because they took the St. Louis Blues to overtime in Game 7 in their series.
Because it's a little frustrating, because it feels frustrating to me, because all I can think about is, man, if they look where the Stars are, and if the Avs could have just gotten there, they'd be there right now. They were better than those guys. Their goalie got hurt.
It's actually because of the injuries that makes it feel a little bit better, because we know that if they're healthy, like they almost beat the Stars when they were banged up.
Right.
So if they're healthy, there's no telling what the Avalanche
It'll be interesting, because the Avs next year are going to they like I told everybody before, they were dark horse candidates for the Stanley Cup. Next year they won't be dark horse candidates. When people are talking about the NHL, they're going to be in the top 3 or 4 teams that's likeliest to win the whole thing. So that is pretty exciting.
I think they'll definitely be favorites in the Western Conference.
Yeah. You got to give the Denver Nuggets some credit. Yes, they lose in that heartbreaker as Anthony Davis hits the 3, because somehow when you put a Lakers uniform on, you get magical powers like Harry Potter on a basketball court. Frustrating. Anyway, Jamal Murray in his 44 minutes had 25 points, and the interesting part was how valuable he was to the Nuggets. You look at the stats that underlie it a little bit. When Jamal Murray wasn't on the floor, which, by the way, was not often, he was only off the floor for 4 minutes. That's it. In that 4 minutes, the Lakers outscored the Nuggets by 18 points. So that's bad, but it also shows the kind of impact that Murray is having. That it's the offense is part of it, but it wasn't like Murray was likely to score 18 in 4 minutes. It's the fact that they're just a better balanced team on the whole with him on the floor. I don't know what the Nuggets do about that, because you can't go to Jamal Murray and say, hey, man, got to go 48 tonight. I mean, he's got to come off the court at some point. They have to be aware of the fact that this has been a problem for them, and they have to find a way to solve it, because, yeah, you can ride Murray and Jokic big minutes, but at the moment, they've got to find some more scoring options, and they have to find a way to make sure that the game doesn't fall apart when one of those two guys is off the court. And it's going to be hard to do. It's not as if the Lakers have a tremendous amount of depth, but they have good role players who definitely do a good job of smelling blood in the water. Guys like Rajon Rondo certainly is outstanding at that. And inexplicably in this series, Dwight Howard. I don't know how that's happening either. Remember that weird Magic Laker jersey stuff? Yeah, that. Anyway, the Nuggets have a chance to at least get back in the series tomorrow night. We'll be excited to break that down with our Nuggets insider, Matt Moore, find out what the Nuggets did and what they can going forward. Hopefully they can steal one and make it 2-1 and make this a little more interesting. So, Dylan, who else did you have?
So I actually had Aaron Jones, the Packers starting running back. He obviously led the Packers in rushing yardage. He also led them in receiving yardage and ended with 236 yards combined between rushing and receiving.
Fantasy players ahoy.
Oh, my league, he scored 45 points.
Yeah, that's how you win a week right there.
Oh,
you get a guy like that.
He also scored 3 touchdowns and averaged over 10 yards per touch.
Now that's madness because he's still running the ball. I mean, that's absolutely crazy. But, you want, if you're the Denver Broncos and you're looking for the squad goals, think of that, but for Melvin Gordon. That's kind of what you should try to do. Because I've talked about this after Courtland Sutton, mentioned it earlier today. Courtland Sutton had 6 targets before he got hurt. And those targets need to mostly go to Noah Fant and to Melvin Gordon because that's something they can exploit. Getting it to the tight end and your running back are good ways to take the pressure off your quarterback too. You get those out quickly. You have an opportunity to spread the field wide. It reduces the impact of the blitz and the pass rush, which just ate the Broncos alive yesterday. 6 sacks, 17 quarterback hits. That's not sustainable. So this is what you paid Melvin Gordon $8 million for. No, I don't expect him to get 236 yards combined and 3 touchdowns. But feed the guy. Feed him. He ran well, and he can catch. This is the opportunity. That's what you paid him to do. I hope the Broncos utilize Melvin Gordon in that style like the Packers did with Aaron Jones. I think it's one of the few ways that the Broncos, with all their injuries, might be able to stay in a game with Tom Brady's Buccaneers. So I liked seeing it because you can see how it's done. And for the Broncos, that may be one of the pathways to doing it. I'm going to go over it hurts me a little to give mine to a Dallas Cowboy, but I have to do it because this is the guy prior to the draft when he was drafted that I was lobbying for the Denver Broncos to select. And that didn't happen. Instead, they went with Paxton Lynch. And most any other quarterback would have been better than that. But this particular quarterback's much better than that. And that's Dak Prescott, who just yesterday, mind you, just in the one game, just yesterday, had 450 yards passing and 3 touchdowns on the ground. So that's a game. Responsible for 4 touchdowns, including the one he passed for, 450 yards through the air. And they needed it because he scored 4 touchdowns and they won by 1 point. And that was a weird one to win, a hard game to win. Give the Cowboys credit for that one because Atlanta became the first team in the history of the NFL to score 39 or more points with no turnovers and lose. And the Falcons have a Cleveland Browns level of bad luck in the way they lose. That's crazy. But Dak Prescott on the young season already has 716 yards, a 68.6 completion percentage. Keep in mind, on 47 pass attempts for 450 yards, he completed 72.3%. And he's run for 3 touchdowns. So, yeah. Prescott's quarterback rating on the year, 101.7. Yikes. That guy is getting paid in the offseason. Big time paid. Oh, it's nice seeing the Cowboys get stuck with the bill. It's been a lot of fun. Monday Night Football was entertaining. Watch out for the Raiders. Playing very well. Derek Carr, one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the league. Thanks to Dylan Connon in the booth. He's the one that makes it all work. Thanks to you for listening. Thanks for all the texts. Had an opportunity to read a lot of those. Always appreciate all the interaction. We'll do it again tomorrow following the Nuggets Game 3. Matt Moore will join us, our Nuggets insider. We'll hand things off to Sports Center all night. My name is Sean Drotar. You can follow me on Twitter at SDROTAR. This is The Fan Late Night on Denver Sports Station, Sports Radio 104.3, The Fan.